lot of good books in the month of February, and we're going to talk about those books today. At the beginning of the year, I talked about the 25 books that I want to read in 2025. These were my most anticipated releases. And when I went through my January wrap-up, I didn't take a look to see if I read any of those books that were on my anticipated releases list. So we're going to talk about them now really quickly. I read 9 books in the month of February. 2 of them were on my 25 of 2025. And in January, I had read 2 books that were also on my 2025 releases. So all in all, so far, I've read 4 books out of my 25 of 2025. Those books being Babylonia by Costanza Casati, The Crash by Freida McFadden, which we'll talk about, Onyx Storm by Rebecca Yarros, and then Deep End by Ali Hazelwood, which we'll talk about today. Last year I didn't really keep track of this, so I just want to be mindful this year and make sure that I'm reading books that I have been wanting to prioritize for the year. So we're going to start doing that now. Now let's get into the books that I read in February. The first one being The Crash by Freida McFadden. This was on my 25 of 2025 anticipated releases. And unfortunately, this book, frankly, was awful. I really did not like it. I am always hesitant about pregnancy stories or books that involve a main character who is pregnant. And this is a thriller about our main character. Her name is Tegan. She's 8 months pregnant, and she, for some reason, decides to drive during a snowstorm to visit her brother, and her car crashes, hence the book title, The Crash. And this couple finds her and takes her in, and it's giving Misery meets Black Phone, and it just wasn't really good at all. I feel like our main character, Tegan, was just dumb. She just keeps doing and thinking and making just really dumb decisions. If you're 8 months pregnant, why would you drive during a snowstorm when you should stay at home and be safe so you're not putting your child at risk? You know, I did listen to the audiobook, and in Freida McFadden fashion, I think that her books are always so easy and fast-paced, and that's how I felt when I listened to the audiobook. It got me through my work commutes, going to work and coming home. It was fast-paced. It was nothing amazing. I have to say that this is probably one of my least favorite Freida McFadden books that I've read, and I've listened to plenty of her stories. I think it's because not only our main character being dumb, but the ending of the story didn't match up to the pacing, and I also thought that the ending was unpredictable in a poorly written way. I really think that Freida could have done something different with the ending. I wouldn't recommend this book. I think if you're going to read a Freida McFadden book, there's others that I enjoyed even more. So not my cup of tea, and that's okay because I'm probably still going to read every Freida McFadden book that she comes out with since they're so bingeable and easy to read. My favorite format for Freida McFadden books are audiobooks, and I'll probably continue and read whatever she comes out with next. I've read every single Ali Hazelwood book that she has come out with, and this might have to be in my top 3. Bride is still my favorite Ali Hazelwood book, and Check and Mate has a place in my heart. I'm not going to go into too much detail about Deep End because I do have a reading vlog that I just uploaded recently, so you can go ahead and watch that. But this was really fun and unique compared to her STEM romance novels that she writes, even though this does include our main male and female character who study in the world of STEM. This is about our main female character. Her name is Scarlett, and she is a diver at Stanford, studying biology and hoping to get into med school, hence the STEM part of this book. And then we have our main male character. His name is Lucas. He is a swimmer at Stanford as well, so they kind of run in the same group, but obviously diverse swimmer. They do different things. Lucas is also an Olympic award winning swimmer, so he's really good at what he does. And so does Scarlett, except she is trying to recover from some trauma that happened to her in the past. So she's going to therapy, and I love that Ali Hazelwood gives a nod to therapy in this story. I think it's written well because therapy is not perfect, and it's not perfect for every single human being, and everyone else treats and learns from therapy differently. And I think that in this story, Ali shows that Scarlett really struggles with therapy, but she knows how good it is for her, if that makes sense. So I really appreciate that. Lucas and Scarlett end up getting into some no strings attached relationship of some sorts, and it gets a little bit kinky, not too much. I have to say, Ali Hazelwood said that this is her spiciest book she's written, and I have to disagree with her. I thought that Not in Love was her spiciest compared to this, and I didn't like Not in Love at all, but I really enjoyed this book. I also think I liked it because yes, it is centered around Stanford biology, STEM research, but there's this sports romance element added to it that really just changed how the story is written. And I think that now we know that Ali Hazelwood can write something other than STEM romance, and I appreciate that. And I had such a good time with this book. One thing I will say is that I wish there was more BDSM, more kink, more of that in here, because it was kind of mild. People were describing this as 50 Shades of Grey, but I think it was a little bit of sprinkled in here and there. It's open door romance, don't get me wrong, but I think that we were all expecting real spice when she said this is her spiciest, or maybe that's what I thought. That's what I was expecting. And it ended up not being, but that's okay because I still had such a fun time. Such a fun time, and I really enjoyed our two characters, Lucas and Scarlett. Also, the ending was lovely. I recommend. A book that I devoured and I can't stop thinking about is The Favorites by Layne Fargo. You would know this if you watched my reading vlog where I also read Deep End by Ali Hazelwood. Check it out. I go through a lot of emotions. This book made me feel things. It made me feel every single emotion. I am obsessed with this story, and it's one of my favorites. I read this book physically with this book, but I immediately need to listen to the audiobook because of the multi-narration and voices of the audiobook, and you'll understand why right now. This is a documentary-styled story. So think Daisy Jones and the Six, where you have different people answering questions, retelling a set of events that happened 10 years ago. This is about our main characters, Kat and Heath. They're both ice dancers who are trying to make it to the Olympics and win gold. Their whole background is that they started from the bottom and they're making way up to the top and kind of just being the best ice dancers that they can be, but also they're obsessed with each other in the most unhealthy of ways. And I love it so much. There is drama in this book, so I would say Magnolia Parks and Gossip Girl, because of the narrations and the documentary styled story that this is. It's so good. Every single chapter is left with a cliffhanger. So this is a book that I honestly binged. I read this so fast, and people need to read this book. It's hyped on Book Talk and Bookstagram, and I recommend this. I don't know if it's made it to YouTube yet, but here I am bringing it to BookTube because this is a book that I loved. And the ending could have gone in a lot of different ways, but I'm glad that it did the way that it did because I might have just ripped the house apart if it didn't go how I wanted it to. So take that as you will. I recommend this book. It is dramatic. The love is intoxicating. It's ice skating, or ice dancing, sorry. So there's competition involved. It's cutthroat. It's just wild in the best way. Go watch my reading vlog. This next book is in a reading vlog. It is Blood Over Brighthaven by M.L. Wang. This was February's book club pick for my book club. We read books on Fable. It's free to join. Link is down in the description below. We are starting March's book. This book is absolutely fantastic, and more people should be reading this book. Emma Wang can do no wrong, and I really need to read Sword of Kaigen like yesterday, and I'm gonna pick it up because she might be one of my favorite authors now. This book takes place in Tehran, which is a utopian society that's governed by both religion and magic. This is a story about our main character. Her name is Sayona. Sayona has been studying for 20 years to finally be the first female admitted to the high magistracy. What that really means is that Tehran is a society that has not only gender-based oppression, but also socioeconomical disparities. It's a crazy, awful society that I feel like has rewound time, and it feels like that's what life is like right now. I feel like we're rewinding based on the political climate and everything that's happening. So some of it is a little bit relatable with things that have happened in our history and things that are trying to happen now. So Sayona, she finally gets admitted to the school, and there's a bunch of different challenges that she's having to deal with. The men who are her coworkers now treat her terribly, and every high mage gets an assistant. But Sayona doesn't get an assistant who is another mage. Sayona gets a janitor as an assistant. And what we end up finding out is that our janitor is not who we think he is, and he and Sayona are going to work together to unravel history and learn some secrets that have been hidden from the citizens of Tehran. So this book is very impactful. From the very first chapter, I could not put this book down. Sayona is such a flawed character, but also we see her grow as we read the story, and as she's trying to learn the difference between what's right and wrong, and what she's learned in the past growing up might not be morally okay. And Tomil is our other main character. He's the janitor. I think that his storyline is woven in really well with Sayona's as they get to know each other and work together to unravel some secrets. The magic system in here is wild and so intricate, but also really fascinating and nothing that I've read before. It's kind of like computer programming. You have this spellograph, which is kind of like a typewriter. You input coordinates and then you output magic, and you have action spells based on what you input, and you get output. Beyond the immersive plot and world building, I thought the politics was really interesting in this story as well, because it plays such an important role with our magic system and religion, because of how both magic and religion drive the society as a whole. It's just written so well. I don't know what else to say. It's a little over 400 pages of beauty. It's so good. There are so many themes woven into this story, from racial stereotypes to political manipulation, but one theme that stuck out to me the most is the idea of morality and the idea of good and bad intentions, and if they make somebody a good person. If your intentions were good but you harm someone else, are you a good person or are you not a good person? I think it all just depends on the situation. I don't want to ruin the plot. I don't want to ruin the story, but The story centers around Siona and what she does after she finds out this big secret that the government has been trying to hide, and in the end, if that is moral or not. And we kind of learn with her about morality, and the outcome is, it's good. It's good. I highly recommend. I feel like I've rambled. Recommend. Watch my video. Read this book. Message me once you've read it. Let me know your thoughts. How to End a Love Story by Yulin, Kuang. I was nervous to read this book. I've heard mixed reviews about it, and I did try to pick this book up last year. Put it back down. Wasn't in the mood. This is a second chance romance about two writers who had a complicated history and past, and things get resurfaced 13 years later when they're forced to work together. I love a second chance romance story. I love love, and I love when two people get to try to make love happen again. And so I was intrigued by this story, but this story centers heavily around grief and loss of a family member. Our main female character, her name is Helen, and her sister passes away, and it's related to our main male character. His name is Grant. And 13 years later, after this event, they finally find each other by happenstance, I suppose, and they're forced to work together. From there, they kind of find closure in an unexpected way. To me, I think that the grief within the story could have been fleshed out a little bit more. We read from Helen's point of view, and we know that she's trying to be okay with what happened, and she's cooping up all of her emotions and kind of pushing them away into this tiny box somewhere in her soul, somewhere far, far away. But then things resurface when she meets Grant, and all of a sudden she is angry, resentful. All of these emotions come back out, but then they work together, and then she just forgives him. Like, I feel like things just went so quickly, and the process of all of these emotions didn't feel like a smooth transition. She just went from feeling resentful and upset, and I never want to talk to you, Grant, to we're just falling in love. And I do want to say that Yulin has potential. I love her writing style. We do get Grant's point of view, and I love when we get a male character's point of view. And the romance in here is open door, and it's written really well. I think that there's a lot of emotion in this story, and there's a reason why Yulin Kuang is the screenwriter for Emily Henry's adaptations, because her writing is really good. I personally just didn't like the grief aspect, and I know that this book is really centered around that. I liked our two main characters. I liked Grant more than I liked Helen. Honestly, I'm not sure if Helen deserves Grant. That might be mean, but loved Grant. Didn't necessarily vibe with Helen, and then I didn't like the grief aspect. But other than that, the story was good. If there's even a story there after you remove like the main parts of the story, it was good. I don't know if I would recommend this, but I think that Yulin has a potential, and I can't wait to see what she writes next because I do want to read it. I feel like I read Swordcatcher by Cassandra Clare a long time ago. February went by so fast, but do I even remember reading this book? Just kidding, I do. I really liked this adult fantasy. This book has forbidden love, it has multiple point of views, it has characters from different socioeconomical statuses that we're following along. The magic in this story is really fun too. There's political intrigue in here as well. It's actually centered heavily on politics and what's governing the main city-state called Castellan. I don't know why I looked at the cover because it doesn't say anything other than Swordcatcher. In this story, we get 2 points of views. We get Kel and Layne. Kel is a sword catcher for the prince, Prince Connor. A sword catcher is basically a stunt double, a bodyguard. Kel was taken from an orphanage at a very young age and trained beside Prince Connor to basically protect Prince Connor with his life. And Kel is a stand-in at different events. Kel basically is sworn to die for the prince. And then we have our main female character. Her name is Layne. Layne is a healer in this city, and she's actually a part of this religiously oppressed group within the city. They have their own rules that they have to follow. They have their own area that they have to live in. So Layne and Kel's lives could not be any more different, even though Kel came from an orphanage. But he is up there now in the castle of the prince, I guess. I don't know how to talk. Layne and Kel have their own storylines that we follow within the story, and for quite some time I wasn't sure how they were going to be woven together, but I really like how they meet each other and how the stories converge into something bigger, since I did mention that there is a political agenda at hand. I would say that the writing style is very steady with its pacing. We spent quite a lot of time learning about the world. We spent a lot of time learning about our characters and how they spend their daily lives, because I think that's really important as we get to know them separately before we can bring them together. We also spend a lot of time learning about the politics, since it does play a heavy role in the story. I would say that this book sets us up for the sequel, but in the best way. I didn't find this book to be boring. I didn't find it to be slow, since this is a high fantasy, I would say, or an epic fantasy, maybe. We were taking our time with this story, and I think that Cassandra Clare did a great job with the pacing and giving us an information dump without feeling overwhelmed. This book is hefty. It's 600 pages, but Cassandra Clare does a really good job at describing every little thing to really make us feel immersed in the story. And as someone who has been reading a lot of book talk hyped, bookstagram, booktube, popular books, this one is underappreciated, and I really recommend, if you're wanting a fantasy that not a lot of people are talking about, a fantasy that's compelling, a fantasy that is centered around politics but has great character development, then you should pick this up, since the second book is coming out soon. Another book that I fell in love with, Homeseeking by Karissa Chen. This book is one of my favorites of the year. This is not only a historical fiction, but it also is a second chance romance. I love both of our characters in this story. We follow two characters, Wen and Suchi. They both find each other once again 60-ish years later in an LA supermarket, and this is their second chance at love again. How this story is written is fascinating. We get both Wen and Suchi's point of view. Suchi's point of view starts from when they met as children and moves forward in time. But then we have Wen's point of view, where we start at the very end of when they met in LA, and it moves backward in time. So we're getting not only 2 points of views, but we're getting different timelines that slowly converge together. And I think that, one, that must be really difficult to do, but also it's done so well. Karissa Chen has such a way with words, and her writing style is absolutely stunning. So in this book, we travel back and forth in time from one country to another as we follow their different lives up until when they converge again in LA. And I've never been so intrigued by Chinese history and the Chinese Civil War. I Googled so much while I was reading this book. I highlighted, I tabbed, I annotated the heck out of this. The quotes and writing style is absolutely beautiful. I really love this story. And as someone who doesn't normally read historical fiction, this book was very interesting, but also I love that it was a romance. It's a historical fiction romance, since the story is very character driven and there's a lot of growth that we see with both of our characters. They both go through different hardships because of the time period where the story is taking place. We learn a lot about China as a whole and its history. So Karissa Chen does her research and does it really well to make sure that she's giving us all of the information we need so we can follow along with Haiwen and Suchi's lives. There's heartbreak, there's heartache, and there is also love at the end. It's really good. I recommend this. Salt to the Sea by Ruta Sepetys. This is a YA historical fiction. I don't know how I stumbled upon this book. I've never read any of the author's works before. I've never heard of this book. I stumbled upon an Instagram reel from a bookstagrammer, and now I wish I would have saved it because I want to give credit. I had randomly reserved it at the library and it showed up. I forgot about it. And I'm really glad I read this story. I dub this the Titanic of World War II. No one talks about what happened during the tragic events of the sinking of Wilhelm Gustloff, the ship that killed 9,000 passengers. We follow 4 different teenagers from very different backgrounds in life as they're trying to flee Soviet control and try to get on this ship to a better life. And it's heartbreaking and devastating, especially learning about these different perspectives of World War II. We get the 4 different points of views, which I really, really liked because we follow them individually, but also at some point they connect together as they journey forward. We follow a Lithuanian nurse, we follow a Prussian soldier, we follow a German, and then we follow a Polish girl as well. So 4 different walks of life as they work together to get to safety, and it all leads to a really sad ending, and we know what's coming. I think that this is a book that everyone should read. It is YA, so the writing style was nothing glamorous. It was very straightforward, easy to read. It took no time at all, which is why I think I do recommend it, since it is on the easier writing style side, but also it does pack a punch. What I will say is that we get so much of the book, maybe 75% of the book, about their journey to the ship, and then they get on the ship, and then the ship sinks. I wish we would have gotten a little bit more time with our characters on the ship, getting more perspective with how the ship was, I guess, even though we know how the story ends. It's a really heartbreaking story, but we're not talking about it. And it makes me want to read more historical fictions. And it makes me want to learn more about history from different perspectives and walks of life because there's so much to learn. The last book that I read in February, Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. Finally, this was a buddy read with Chelsea from Libraries and Lattes. I love buddy reading with her. We always have such a great time. The first book in Mistborn trilogy, the first part of the Cosmere. I don't even really know much about the Cosmere. I went in with really high expectations because everyone said that Brandon Sanderson is Brandon Sanderson. He's just on a pedestal, one of the best authors out there, and I've heard nothing but good things about Mistborn, so I went in with high expectations, and I was pleasantly surprised. This book was really interesting. I really liked it. Okay, what's funny is that the back says, one of the finest fantasy stories I've ever read and endlessly entertaining. I wouldn't say that this was one of the best fantasies that I've ever read, but it was really good and I still had a great time and I like it enough to pick up the next book. This is a story about Luthadel, which is a part of the Final Empire, and it is ruled by this immortal Lord Ruler, and he basically brought mist and darkness into Luthadel, and basically he is a ruler that cannot be overthrown, and he is bad. He's the bad guy, he's the villain. We have two main characters, Vin and Kelsier. Kelsier is this badass dude. He's a Mistborn, and he basically is a thief, kind of, I guess. And then we have, I feel like I'm doing a terrible job explaining this book. Did I even read it? We have our main female character. Her name is Vin. Vin is a teenager. I really like Vin as our main female character. She is a ska thief, and she finds out something about herself when she starts working with Kelsier. And the whole goal of this story is to overthrow the Lord Ruler. So now Kelsier and Vin, they stumble upon each other and then they work together with this other ragtag group to overthrow the government, basically. And there's balls involved, and Vin has a love interest. There's a lot of politics within the different high society that they have in Luthadel, and I feel like I'm explaining this to a 2-year-old, and I'm still doing a really bad job. Vin goes to these balls. She also is learning about her powers and what she can do. And by the end of the story, this big plot happens that I can't spoil anything, which really drove me to want to read the next book. I want to say, though, that the ending of the story kind of wrapped the first book up like a little present with a bow. I felt like it could be a standalone. If you've read this, do you think it could be a standalone? Because the way it ended made me feel good, and I don't feel forced to pick up the next book, even though I'm going to. I love any book that has to do with alchemy. I like that it involves metals for using magic, and I am intrigued. I am looking forward to reading the next book. I am so sorry that was an awful review, but you get what you get. Those are my reviews for the 9 books that I read in the month of February. Overall, just such a good reading month. I am impressed, and I am so glad that it started off strong.